Flash and JavaScript are an important part of an interactive site. We'll make sure you know how to insert Flash and Flash video, add behaviors, some form elements, and use Spry in Dreamweaver. Let's get started. So let's start by going over to our Files panel and redefining our root folder. So we are in Chapter 10, and I'm going to browse for Chapter 10 and click Save. It's going to recreate our cache, and done. Let's start with some Flash video. So we have some files here in our File panel, in our root folder, Meetings and Meetings End. So if I look at my end file, I see that I have some video in here. And now I need to take a look at this in my browser, because unlike actual Flash, I have to look inside of my browser to be able to see this. So I'm going to preview this in my browser, and I'm going to choose Firefox. And I'm going to scroll down a little bit so I can actually see it. Now, if you don't see it right this minute, and you get a message saying that you need the newer version of Adobe Flash Player to see it, don't worry about it. I'm going to show you how to add that movie in just a minute. I'm going to turn down my volume. Let's actually turn that off because there is audio in there, so I'm just going to go ahead and turn that off. And I can click play, and now I see my video. And I can shut that off. I also want to point out about the video that was actually created as an MOV, and that was taken into the Flash encoder and converted into a Flash video. Okay, so let's go back to Dreamweaver. And now we can actually make this happen in our meetings here. It's really very, very simple. So if I go to my design view, I see I've got my spot open here for my video. So I can get this video from multiple locations. So I could use my Assets panel and make sure that I'm on my Movies, and there is my movie. I could use my Insert panel or my Insert menu to be able to put this in my page. So I'm going to put my cursor in here, and instead of dragging this time, I have it selected over in my Assets, and I'm just going to click Insert. So that way I don't have to browse for the URL. It already knows where it is. Now I don't have a streaming video server. Wish I did, but I don't. So this is going to be a progressive download video. You want to make sure that you're putting your path relative to the page or an actual absolute path. So HTTP, etc. I'm going to choose a skin, but before I choose a skin, notice that I've got different widths for each type of skin. I'm going to go ahead and detect my size first, because I'm not even sure what size that is, so because you don't want your width to be wrong. So I see that I've got 480 for my width. So now I can choose a skin, so I'm just going to choose my Clear Skin 3 minimum width. I'd like to just go ahead and point out while we're here that if I were in Flash and I had actually put this video in Flash, then I would have a whole lot more skins to choose from. And I can choose to auto-play or auto-rewind. Since I'm a usability person, I don't want to do that to anybody. Let them choose what that's going to be like. So I'm going to click OK. Now that's actually in my file, so all I really have to do is preview that in Firefox. So I will save it before I preview it. If the Copy Dependent Files dialog box pops up asking you to upload some files to your server, just click OK. We'll discuss this in the very next lesson. And there's my video. That's as simple as it is to put video in Dreamweaver. Okay, so now that we have the video in, go ahead and open your index and index before. If I take a look at my index file, I see that I have some Flash in here. So for instance, my properties really look a whole lot different than they did for the video. So I've got a place to give it an ID. It shows me my width and my height. I have the file for the source for where my SWF happens to be. I have a source for the flash file. So in case that I need to change something about it, I could show it where the source is for the original FLA, and then I could go back and forth. Notice that I also have an edit button for that as well. I can have a background color. Now, why I have a background color, let me point out this drop-down menu right here. So it says W mode. In Dreamweaver CS4 and before that, whenever I put my flash inside of my document, I would have to choose a parameter. So for instance, if I had a talking head, so somebody doing a video talking, it would have to be taken on a blue or a green screen, enabled the alpha for it to have a transparent background. When I bring that into Flash, as long as I don't change the background color in Flash, when I put that inside of my document here, I really get the choice of whether that is going to be transparent or not. So by default, now in CS5, it is opaque by default. And that is going to also affect my z-index on my page. And that's also going to affect what else is on my page. Let's say if I had a CSS menu that had a drop down to it, that if I don't have at least W mode of opaque, that drop down is going to go underneath my flash file instead of over top. And if I have that video of a talking head, if I choose transparent, then I'm going to be able to see through the background, and then I could actually change my background color and have it actually change. Now if I click on parameters here for this, there's already a couple of parameters. When I save my file, it's going to create a scripts folder and some files inside of that folder so that it displays right in all of my browsers in all platforms. And if I needed some other parameter, I could always put that in there. So I've got some alignment, I have the quality and a scale, and whether it's basically going to loop or not. Now, we always end up having this V space and this H space, but most of the time I can change those things through CSS. There's really no need to alter those things right in the code itself. So I have a little bit of a CSS for it just so that I have a z-index on it so that it is up above everything else on my page. And if I click on play with it selected, I should actually see my video. So this is basically just a little slideshow. And I also have these little buttons here that I could push. Now this was all created with a brand new program for CS5 called Flash Catalyst. And I'm going to stop that. And also, if I were to look at this in live view, I will also always be able to see my Flash files as well. So it's really handy to either click on the button or actually see it in live view. Okay, so let's go to our index before. And I need to make sure that I'm in the right place. So I'm going to go to split view. And I'm going to make sure that I have my cursor inside of my Flash container. So that way I don't have to try and figure out where that is in the actual page itself. So I just go straight to the code. Then I could go to design view if I would like, because it's already in the right place. And then I can say insert media and SWF. So I'm going to go find that in Chapter 10. I have my assets folder, my Flash file, and main, and I can choose. So I would want to make sure and put a title to it so that I'm increasing accessibility for that. So I'm just going to tell it that it's going to be my snapshots slideshow. And I'm going to click OK. Now my Flash file is in my page. And let me zoom out. So I'm going to just do a Command minus because I'm on the Mac still. It'd be a Control minus on the PC to zoom out just a little bit. Only when I save do I get the option to add those other files. So when I file and save, I get this dialog box that comes up telling me that I need these two files added to make sure that this works correctly in all of my browsers. Now, I need to also make sure that these files get uploaded to my server. So it's very important, even though you didn't create them yourself, that you are uploading these files to your server as well. So I'm going to click OK. And now I have a folder called scripts. Now, if this isn't in the exact location that I want, remember that I can grab it in my files view and I can bring it up to my assets and drop it inside of my assets, and it says all the files that are going to then need to be updated as well. So I can click on update. Now all of those files have access to those scripts also. So now when I click on live view again, just like the end, there I have my Flash file. Now another way to add interactivity is with some JavaScript. Now we have some Spry objects which we'll do next, but for now we're going to use some of the built-in JavaScript in our behaviors. So I'd like you to open PhotoWalks and PhotoWalks End. If I take a look at my end file and preview that in my browser, and I'll choose Firefox. So now when I look at this, I can click on any of my thumbnails, and now I get a preview of a larger size. And one more, and now we'll go back to Dreamweaver. So if I go over to my PhotoWalks page, scroll down a little bit so I can actually see, and I'm just going to go ahead and click on one of my images. So there's a couple of things that we need to be aware of, or we need to make sure that we have before we start our elements. So for one, I want to go ahead and give each one an ID. And I want to give it an alt tag because I don't want to forget that part. And to make my page function correctly, I need that to be a link. I'll hold down my shift key and do my pound sign or 3. I'm going to hit enter or return just to make sure that it adheres to what I wanted to in the field. And now I need to get my behaviors up. So if I go underneath my window menu and I pull down to behaviors, so now in this particular panel we have attributes. So I've got general attributes about that, so any alignment or height, name, and source. So some really helpful things, anything dynamic and CSS applied to that particular element. And I have behaviors. So in my behaviors, I can call a JavaScript. So for instance, when I work with a form, my preferences here in Dreamweaver are probably not the best for validation. I'm very limited with what I'm able to do. But if I bring in my own JavaScript and call it when I'm trying to validate my form, then I have more powerful access to really the powers of JavaScript. So I can change a property, and you can use this behavior to change the value of an object's properties, for example, the background color of a div or the action of a form. So I can also check my plugins, make sure that the end user has the correct plugin. And I've got some effects. Now these are Spry effects, and I can have a fade or blind or grow and shake. I can go to URL, and this is a bit left over from the frames day. So if I have a link and it's going to go to URL, it's going to be in my main frame or whatever frame that it was supposed to populate that bit of HTML. I can open a browser window, which is what we're going to end up doing. I can have a pop-up message. It looks like a JavaScript error, so I'm not all that fond of that, but if you need a pop-up message and you don't know how to make your own, then you can actually use this. I'm automatically going to preload my images anyway, but I could also then set the text of a container, set the text of a status bar, or a text field. So for instance, my text field is just like a form field, and I could already have a little bit of text in there. So like put first and last name in here. I can show and hide elements. So there's a couple of different elements that I can show and hide, like tables and absolutely positioned items. So for instance, if I roll my cursor over something, then an image pops up, inside of a table, or I have a picture and I need them to know some more information about it, so maybe underneath I have some text that then I can show and hide that will go with that particular image. I can swap images, so this is just a basic rollover for my swap image. And then of course it's already going to restore, and then I can validate my form. Now I can always get more behaviors, so this takes you to the Exchange site on Adobe where you can get more behaviors. So we're going to choose Open Browser Window. So I need to choose a URL to display, and I need to browse, and I need a width and a height. Well, I don't have that yet, so we need to figure that out first. So for instance, I'm going to go ahead and cancel. And I do have some images in here already inside of some HTML, and I'm going to explain to you why they're in the HTML in just a second. So for instance, I have guides in this particular image. So here's my large image. I've made some guides in here, and all I did was just grab it from inside. Let me get rid of my guide. And all you have to do is grab your guide from your ruler and drag it out. You can see it's displaying the distance. And when I have a horizontal and a vertical ruler, and I hold down on the Mac my Command key, on the PC my Control key, I get exactly how wide that is. So I can see that it's 522 by 625. So now when I go back to my PhotoWalks, and I choose my behavior again, Open Browser Window, so I can choose 625 by 522. I need to find where that browser window is at. So I have in Chapter 10 my pictures, and then there's my church picture, and I will click Choose. And I'm just going to allow them to have their scroll bars as needed, and I'm going to give it a name of City Life, and I will click OK. So now when I want to check this, I can go back up here, and I can preview in Firefox, and I'll go ahead and save it. And now when I click on that, I get my pop-up window. Now it's not really a pop-up window. I said pop-up window, but I basically mean a new browser window. So it's not going to get blocked. I want to make that perfectly clear that this will not get blocked. So I'll go back to Dreamweaver, and we'll just do a couple more, then we'll let you finish the rest. So I'm going to click on my next one here, and I see that when I select it, I've already named it. Now I would want to make sure and give it an alt tag too, but I'm going to let you do that. We're going to come back over here to our behaviors, and I'm going to choose Open Browser Window. But actually, we need to figure out, before we do that, just like last time, we want to see the page and what the size is of our open area so that they really don't have to scroll if they don't have to. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Dog. And I've already got my guides in here, so I just hold down my Command on the Mac and a Control on the PC. So I've got 585 for my height and 824 for my width. So I'm going to add my Open Browser Window and 824 by 585. And I'll add my scroll bars, and I'm going to go find my dog. So my beaches, and I will click OK. And now we can just finish on out, and we've got this great added behavior so that when they click on the thumbnail, they can see it in full view. If you've ever been to a website where they've opened this up in a brand new window, but it's the exact same size as the thumbnail, then you'll understand why this is so important. So now we can move on to working with forms, which is another way to add interactivity into our site. Now, we almost always need some sort of form to have our end user contact us. So I have a contact.html page. And we already have part of a form in here, so let's make sure that we can see what we need over in our insert panel. So I'm going to fold up my files and double click my insert, fold up my tag inspector, and there we go. So I'm going to choose forms. So the very first thing that we want to put on our page is an actual form tag. So if I take a look at my code, I see the form ID for that particular tag. When I select it here in my tag inspector, I see the properties for that. So I probably wouldn't want to leave it just at form 1. Maybe name it basically what it's for, contact. Now I have an area here for actions. My actions is very important. What we're basically going to be doing in Dreamweaver initially is just the look and feel of that form. Now you need something, even with an email, to make it work properly, to send that data where it needs to go. So I need a script of some sort. So either it's a CGI script or PHP, Perl script. There are several different ways, depending on your server, in getting that information from the form back to you the way you need it. So I have a method as well. So I've got a get and post method. Post is my typical method for sending that data. I can choose a target, and again, that's mostly for the old days when we had frames, and I can encrypt it. So for instance, here I can apply a multi-part form data or apply different types of encryption. So let's take a look at what else that we have here. So I have a text field. Now a text field is fairly simple. Let me make sure I'm actually selecting the text field. I want to give it a name. Now it's very important for our naming conventions here. We don't want to have a space anywhere or it's not going to work properly. So more than ever, this is very important. Now if you're working with a developer, make sure that your naming conventions is what the developer needs. Now I can also give it a character width and a maximum width. See that it's a property of a text field. Now this is something that I can target in CSS as well. Even though we're not going to bother with this particular contact form, there is lots and lots of information on styling forms available. So I have a type. Is it going to be single line, multi-line, or a password? And I can also give it an initial value. Now is it going to be a disabled field, or is it going to be just read only? Now if I need something to be required, that requires more of a dynamic form, and that goes beyond this particular chapter. So I have a hidden field, and my hidden field stores information entered by a user, such as a name or an email address or viewing preference, and then use that data when the user next visits the site. So this is information that you're probably not going to come up with on your own. Again, when you're working with the developer, they'll tell you what needs to have a hidden field or not. Or depending on what script you're using, they will also tell you typically good instructions on exactly what is needed. So then I have a text area. My text area really isn't all that much different from my text field. So I have a text area here. So I have a character width and I have a number of lines, and you'll see that this is indeed multi-line instead of single. But it is a text field, and again, I can target that through CSS. Now I have a checkbox. Well, that's fairly simple, and if I put my cursor in here, and I'll hit my enter or return key, and if I click checkbox, I get this dialog that comes up for my accessibility. Now, we said in our preferences earlier that we wanted to make sure and have good accessibility for everything that we did, and this is one example. So I can give it an ID. So let's say that this is going to be, would you like to sign up for the newsletter? So my ID might be newsletter. And then for my label, I can actually put that sentence. And I can attach this label tag using a for attribute, which is also a little more accessible than just the label itself. And notice that my position is going to be either before or after the form item, and I can have a tab index. So this is going to be my third in line, then I can have this be my tab index of 3, again making it more accessible. So I click OK, and now I get that in my document, and if I select my label, I see my checkbox, and I need to put in a checked value for this. So I'll just put my checked value in as newsletter. Now we can choose an initial state, having it checked or not, and even though you can choose checked for initial state, it's not very nice to do so. Now I've got a checkbox group. So my group allows, basically, think about a multiple selection of something. So if I want this to be my snapshots site, I might give them several options, like are they interested in networking, speaking, presenting at workshops. I could give them a multiple choice, and then they would be able to check multiple options, but it's going to be a group. So when it goes back to my database, all the information will be a part of a group instead of individual things, and it would make more sense. So I have a radio button, and a radio button on its own really doesn't do that much. Really, the radio button group makes much more sense. So for instance, we have a which type of camera do you own, an SLR or digital. And if I didn't have this as part of its own group, that really wouldn't make any sense either, and they would be able to check each one individually. Now I only want them to be able to check one, so I'm using a radio button and a radio button group. So see, the radio button is called camera, and if I click on that one, that is also called camera, and I would have a separate checked value for each one. So then I've got a couple of menus here. So I've got a select menu and a jump menu. So for instance, if I put my cursor after this and choose my select menu, and I might have this be for what type of camera they own. So you'll notice again with my ID there is no spaces, and I don't know that I really feel like I need to put a label in here, and I will show you why. So I'll just say no label and OK for just a second. So in my property inspector, that's selected, that is going to be a list menu instead of just a regular menu, because I want to allow for multiple selections. Now I have to give it a height and then a list value, but I'm going to choose my list value first. And here's where I would start to add my items. So I could enter something like Nikon and Canon. Now the value may not be the same thing as the item name. If I were Baskin Robbins and I had my 31 flavors, for instance, I bet that Rocky Road probably isn't in their code actually Rocky Road. I'm sure it has some number value to it, so that's what would need to be sent back. maybe it's just OL, etc. And I would kind of carry that on. If I wanted to put maybe an initially selected item here, I might say, what camera do you use? I don't need a capital C. And I will say what? That doesn't need a value, but I am going to go ahead and put that up above everything else. When I click OK, I can say what my height is. So maybe my height is 3. And now I can click on my initially selected value. I don't necessarily need a label. I could always put one with it. Or I can now give instructions since it is allowing multiple selections, telling them what key to hold down to add multiples. I also have a jump menu. Now my jump menu is going to really take me somewhere. So in the past, I've seen people use this as even a sitemap. So they've got a drop down and it will actually take you to that particular page. In the context of our site, I might have something for them to go to. Maybe I have a whole bunch of locations for my snapshots user group, and it could take them to that location. I have an image field, so instead of the way that my button actually looks, I can use an image field instead. So in a search bar, I could have it be a magnifying glass, for instance, and have that be my Go button. My file field allows me to browse for a file. Now, before you add something like this in, make sure you check with your host. So whoever's hosting it, whatever server that's going to be on, a lot of people won't even allow this strictly because it's a little bit of a security risk. So depends on what you're asking them to upload. Is it images? Is it resumes, for instance? So you want to check with your host first and make sure that they will allow that particular field. And I've got my regular button. So for instance, down here, I could regular button at the end. And when I click on button, I can give it an ID. So there's my submit. This doesn't need a label, and I actually wouldn't want to put one with it. So when I have it selected, I have my actual value. So whatever I put in here then ends up being as a part of my button. Of course, I also have another type of action for that button, and I could reset instead of submit that button. So I can add a label if I hadn't put one in there before, and I also have a field set. So take a look at the little icon for the field set. I love using field sets around a form so that I can then style it with CSS. So I can put the name of the form above it, so it's my contact form. It makes it more accessible, and it lets me style the entire form area a lot easier with CSS. Now I do have some Spry elements in here for something a little more dynamic. So I have my passwords and select and radio groups for Spry as well. So those are the basics of putting your form fields into your page. Adding Spry to your site and adding other interactivity is really quite simple. So let's take a look at our Files panel. And there are a couple of files we'd like to open, and that's About and About End. And also Join and Join End. Okay, so if I take a look at the Join End here, I see a Spry panel. And this couldn't be any simpler putting this together. So if I take a look at this in live view, scroll down so I can actually see it, I see that I've got this great looking little panel here. I click on my next tab, then I can go back and forth without having the end user scroll down any farther on the page. Now on the About one, on the end, we see this nice little menu. And this is a Spry menu, and it works off of an unordered list. And I need to look at this in the live view. And let me scroll over here so I can see it. When I roll my cursor over meetings, for instance, I now see that there are different meetings here in a drop-down. And if I had a third level, that would be easy enough to do as well. So let's look at that. So let's start with about.html. And we're going to get rid of everything that was in here before. So I'm going to go to my code. And I'm going to take that whole entire UL there. And I'm just going to put the word content for now. And I'll go back over to my design view. I want to be able to still select my content inside of that particular area. And in my insert, I'm going to go to Spry and pull down until I find my Spry menu bar. So I'd like it to be horizontal, and I'm going to click OK. And so it's very just basic in look and feel at this point. So I can name it. I give it an item. So for instance, my first item here would be home. And then if I had any secondary items, then they would show up as well. So then I would just continue on naming my items in here and then assigning any secondary or third level page. When I save this, I need to save some little Spry elements. And they end up just like my SWF information over inside of my files, and I would need to make sure that that is uploaded to my site. So you can see that is super easy to put in, and if I look at the code for that, I see my unordered list. It has an ID, and I would need to give it its own special ID, and class menu bar, etc. Now, this particular bar already had something styled to it, so I'm going to select that, and I'm going to give it a different class style of alt nav container. So then that will much easier allow me to style this. And if I take a look at my CSS styles and all, then I'm able to see at the bottom there all of my CSS for those particular items. So for instance, I'll scroll up here so I can actually see these. So for the UL itself, the LI, and here I can start making changes. So for instance, if I want that to be a different background color, and I'm just going to choose some crazy color here. And let's say since I've made that darker, I make the text white, and I say OK. Now I've made those change. So all I have to do is go through my actual CSS over here, and I have a new look and feel to my menu. For the Spry panel, it's really just as simple. So for instance, in join here, I already have the content that I want inside of those panels, but I maybe don't want my client or my end user to have to scroll down to find it. So I'm going to make a little bit of room here, and I'm going to go to my insert, and I'm going to choose Spry tabbed panel. So I get to name my panel initially. So join, and I can scroll back up so I can actually see it. And I've got several different panels here. So for instance, I've got my 1 and a 2, and I'm going to add a third panel on top of that. So now what I have to do is actually name the panels here. So I can put my cursor in there. I can say info 1, and when I click on the little eyeball, then I see the content for that particular panel. So I'm going to cut that out of there, and I will paste that info in here. So I go to my second tab, and that's going to just be more info, and I can click on that, and now I've got my second bit of information that I can put in there. So I'm just cutting that out, and I will paste that in. And that's going to be even more info. Select it, grab my last bit of information here, place that in, and now when I take a look at my live view, I have a panel that I can quickly and easily move between, and it's super easy, and it's just as stylable as the other. All the Spry stuff is really easy to do. Feel free to add some Spry into your page.